Have you ever wondered why certain secular movies kind of feel Christian? Movies can be a lot of things: entertaining, insightful and moving, or destructive, tempting and distracting. If a movie feels Christian but isn't directly about God, that's no coincidence. In an article published by the Gospel Coalition, Brett McCracken calls this the Christ-like gaze. This video is for everyone who loves movies and wants to get closer to God. I'll be breaking down what the Christ-like gaze is, 7 ways to find out if a movie has the Christ-like gaze or not, and how to watch movies in a way that will help you live more Christ-like. Filmmaking is all about how you see the world. Movies aren't able to fully resemble reality, but they're able to recreate the human experience of reality unlike any other medium. With that, movies are able to pierce through to a truth that isn't so easy to recognize in our day-to-day everyday lives. You know, our reality is the same, but our experiences of that reality are different, and movies can change the way we see the world because each and every single one film sees the world differently. This POV is created through variations of visuals, sounds, and storytelling that filmmakers use to align with their vision. But when we see a film, there's more than just the filmmaker's intention. There's also our perception of that. Certain parts resonate with us, other parts don't, which always makes a movie more or less different than what the filmmakers intended. And filmmakers use this in the way they show images, tell stories, and have the audience's thoughts and intentions in mind. And sometimes really talented filmmakers use this to manipulate the audience in order to spread a certain propaganda or play into disordered desires. But filmmakers can also use this awareness of the audience to respect their thoughts and feelings and actually make them see the world in a way that helps them live more healthy, fruitful lives, or as I, as a Christian, would say, a more God-centered life. So why do certain secular films made by unbelieving filmmakers feel Christian? On this channel, I regularly break down the Christian meaning, influence, and message of secular films, and sometimes that's more clearly there and sometimes it's more hidden. Every Christian knows that we can recognize God working in real life, but we can also recognize it in art that isn't really made with that intent. On that, Brett McCracken writes, "By common grace in a Western culture irrevocably formed by Christianity, in spite of its present secularity, artists of no faith can still create good, true, and beautiful things. The Christian values the West was founded on are seemingly inescapable. It's in our justice system, human rights, science, politics, in the way we make art. The weight of the presence of God isn't something that you can really ignore. You're either for God or against God. So should we as Christians categorize movies in a way that they're either for or against God as well? I've oftentimes been criticized on here on YouTube for over-interpreting movies and TV shows, trying to find a Christian meaning, even though it supposedly wasn't there. I always base my interpretations on what's in the actual movie I'm talking about or on research about the filmmaker's intent, but I clearly have overinterpreted movies many times, and I just don't think I could not be doing that at one point or another. You see, there will always be a difference between the filmmaker's intent and my interpretation, because the intention of a filmmaker can only be that which he claims it to be. Take a filmmaker like Martin Scorsese, for example. He's a devout Roman Catholic, but most of his filmography doesn't really go hand in hand with a Christian life, a Christian worldview. His movies depict all kinds of debauchery, violence, drug use, even more than some of the secular filmmakers' filmographies out there. But then there are his later movies like Silence, The Irishman, Killers of the Flower Moon, that clearly go more hand in hand with the Christian faith. There's also an earlier film called Bringing Out the Dead, who has a strong Christian influence, and that movie was actually written by Paul Schrader, who also wrote Taxi Driver. Now, Paul Schrader is a devout Protestant Christian. Also, when it comes to him, only parts of his filmography go hand in hand with the Christian worldview. For example, he made like First Reformed, which is his Christian film, but the film, yes, I mean, it's a masterful movie. I recently recommended it on here. Is it a full-on Christian movie? I'm not sure. It uses the theme of Christianity to explore more political, psychological, artistic ideas, but it's not really totally God-centered. You see, the question about if something is for or against God becomes really layered when we talk about creativity, because parts of a movie can be centered at God and other parts at the same time can go against that. And I think the reason for that, in comparison to a painting, for example, painting is pretty straightforward, just like a song is or a piece of music, but a movie is made by hundreds of thousands of people. And even when one person wrote the screenplay and directed the movie, there are still the hands and voices of so many people in the final product. Brett McCracken has this to say about subjectivity and objectivity in film. This is especially possible in a visual medium like cinema or photography, where the objectivity of the camera sometimes overpowers the subjectivity of the artist. You see, if I were to clearly categorize some movies as clearly God-centered and clearly against God, I would kind of miss the truth. We as Christians, when we navigate watching content in movies, it's much more difficult, and we have to pay closer attention to what we watch and be much more literate and knowing about what we expose ourselves to. So how can we really tell where the heart of a movie truly lies? One of the most important ways of recognizing what a film is doing is paying attention to the film's gaze. The gaze theory in film states that all films have a way of showing images and telling stories that reflect the subjectivity of a spectator, that is the filmmaker. I think this is super important because it really helps us understand movies better. Feminists today often use the term of the male gaze to talk about the objectification and sexualization of women in movies. And there is some truth in that, but unfortunately, feminists oftentimes misuse this to point to political ideas and how a supposed patriarchy is the root of all evil. Feminism, like so many times, fails to offer an alternative to real issues. The problem with the male gaze, sexualization, objectification in media isn't political. It's all because of sin. Men are also being objectified and sexualized in movies, but way less just because most movies are directed by straight men and thus reflect the sinfulness of these male directors and the audiences they are trying to please. And movies can be sinful in so many ways, telling stories in order to spread propaganda instead of truth. They can have visual and narrative objectification of humans and cater to our primitive desires like sexual immorality, greed, envy, materialism. And it's not just action blockbusters directed by men that are affected and fall into these categories. It's romantic comedies that tell us lies about relationships, dramas that overhumanize destructive behavior, horror films that glorify evil, or art house movies that normalize sexual perversion, and also Christian films that are really nothing more than propaganda. Faith-based or not, a film can be sinful even with good intentions, but there is an alternative to all of that. Movies that show humans as made in the image of God with all our potential and sinfulness alike through the Christ-like gaze. Is there a discernible aesthetic, a way of films seeing their subject that reflects what we know from scripture about how Jesus saw things? I've broken down 7 ways of how films can have the Christ-like gaze. The first characteristic is the film's focus. Christ-like movies look where nobody's looking. Jesus always noticed things nobody noticed. Women touching his garment in the middle of a crowd. He noticed kids, he noticed the poor, the disabled. He also had the ability to see into the depths of a man's heart and wasn't blinded by surface level appearances. Movies have this great opportunity to highlight stories that otherwise wouldn't get noticed. Nomadland tells the story of a widowed woman living on the brink of poverty. She lives as a nomad and bonds with other nomads along the way. The protagonist of this film is an older woman. Her husband died, the place she worked at closed down. The town she once called home has become a ghost town. There is nothing heroic in this film, no big stakes or a grand hero's journey. Still, through this film we look at a person the media overlooks and we find so much humanity. Real struggle, fun, beauty, emotions that we can relate to. Moneyball is a sports movie about a baseball team that's losing and eventually makes a comeback by combining a set of undervalued players that all I have deficiencies but make up for a great team and win in the end. It's a classic underdog story, is David versus Goliath. Memento is about a widowed detective with amnesia who fails to find the killer of his wife. He gets exploited in so many ways because of his disability. The movie is told in reverse, which results into one of the most cinematic, creative, moving and powerful depictions of disability and how mental disabilities bring humans away from reality. It's just one of the best depictions of that. Perfect Days is also a small and a slow movie about a toilet cleaner, a type of man who you encounter everywhere if you live in a city, but you really never pay a second thought. The film shows the fantastic wonders of the mundanity of everyday life. It's set in Tokyo and thus vaguely points to some Buddhist temples and priests in some scenes, but the director Wim Wenders is Christian, and the Christian way of life is indeed truly what is forming this movie. Christ-like movies make you look at people, things and places you would otherwise overlook. The second characteristic is this pure visuals. What do I mean by that? Jesus was a minimalist who had a real closeness to his surroundings. He was a carpenter and expert at working with his hands. He frequently fled to crowds to go to mountains, into deserts, like praying lonely in total isolation. He used mud and spit for his healings and rode a donkey instead of a horse. He's the King of Kings, but was so down to earth. Christ-like movies carry this groundedness in their visuals. Images in Christ-like movies aren't here to distract or disturb you. They're here to ground you. Movies like The Tree of Life are very expressive, but don't use like any forms of extreme stylistic means of creating pictures. Instead, the movie finds beauty in the simple, mundane things. The lighting is natural, the camera always moving, but it's still everything keeps a clear focus. Jesus also teaches us to be holy, set apart, and to flee from sin that defiles our minds and bodies. Christ-like movies don't sexualize or exploit people in front of the camera, but show their innate dignity and potential as humans created in the image of God. At the same time, this imagery is not supposed to be bland, but it finds real beauty everywhere. A good example of this is the Florida Project, which shows like the outskirts of Orlando through the eyes of a child in a way that's really colorful and full of fantasy. Another mark of the Christ-like gaze in film is attentiveness. It is a sense of presence where the subject in front of the camera, whether a person or an environment, is noticed, observed, and respected rather than manipulated for mere utility. A movie like Manchester by the Sea has all natural light, no outstanding colors, it has long takes and no really crazy visual moments. Still, each frame is very intentional, giving us just enough breathing space for spontaneous humanity to unfold, and at the same time always leading us by the hand through the movie. The third characteristic is this: loving storytelling. Time and time again, when Jesus sees people, he has compassion. He has a tender, loving gaze, one that is clearly moved by beholding image of God bearing beings who are suffering, sinning and lost. Jesus looks at people through a lens of love, and Christian artists should do likewise. Christ-like movies define their characters by small and big actions alike. For example, The Descendants is a movie about a middle-aged man who tries to reconnect with his two daughters after his wife is seriously injured in a boating accident. And with his wife on her deathbed, she finds out that she cheated on him with another man. And the way this story is told is truly Christ-like. There is a clear portrayal of adultery as something that destroys families and is rooted in human sinfulness. Still, the movie has so much respect and just empathy for everyone involved. It shows the anger and hurt of the husband and kids, but also the character of the wife who has cheated on him and the man. All of this is shown with a lot of empathy without watering down the sin of adultery into something insignificant. Because the filmmakers are the authors of the story and God is the author of our life, Christ-like movies all need to have a certain love for their characters. This is something the documentaries of Werner Herzog have, for example, in particular Grizzly Man. This is a devastating documentary about two grizzly bear activists who were eaten alive by grizzly bears in Alaska after years of living among them and filming footage for a movie. And Herzog is a filmmaker who is always involved with his subjects in his documentaries, like also standing in front of the camera in some scenes, as opposed to just filming, observing, and commenting his subjects. He tries to give everyone some space to tell their story, while in the end making a clear statement himself. I love how he gives characters that may look or sound crazy at first really a lot of respect and a chance to speak up, while not manipulating us into having a certain opinion of them. It just leads to really good filmmaking that condemns the actions of the subjects and not the subjects themselves. In Christ-like movies, we aren't watching the characters as spectators only, but we are right next to them, right next to their heartbreak, anger, struggle, disappointment, and hope. So Christ-like movies are often character-driven movies where characters aren't put in a box, like just tightly written in order to be tools for a story, but character-driven movies have more of a life of their own. Characteristic number 4, showing necessary horror. There's a big discussions about whether Christians should watch horror movies or not. And I think it's a fine line when it comes to horror movies of showing us evil without glorifying it or exploiting our fears as an audience. When we look at Christianity, the centerpiece of it is a violent image. Jesus nailed on the cross in his final moments, blood all over his body. This violent image is at the same time a symbol of peace, freedom, and love. It's the start of death becoming life. It's the ultimate self-sacrifice. It's the redemption of the human race, restarting our world, and a symbol of total selflessness we as humans could never have, but should strive and aim for. This horrific image is redeemed into the most beautiful thing. The importance of confronting our fears and evil is just key to the Christian message. And this is what a Christ-like movie should reflect as well. The Exorcist is the classic horror movie about a young girl who gets possessed by a demon and two Catholic priests, one who is a young and struggling with his faith and the other who is old and experienced, who team up to let God save her life. And while this movie really has some disturbing and horrifying moments, they never go overboard, and this movie is more about God and faith than it is about evil and the devil. Christ-like movies aren't to act like evil doesn't exist, they are to show it, but always with a glimmer of light. Manchester by the Sea, again, probably one of the most tragic movies that you could ever watch, but even the saddest moments in the film all have some hope in them. The Place Beyond the Pines is a movie that tells a tale of multi-generational trauma and sin passed down from fathers to sons. This has a really hard to swallow message, showing that the wages of sin and the horrors of life sometimes aren't quick to pass, but there's always a way out, always a chance to repent. To be present in the world, to be in relationship with people, is to witness all manner of pain and heartbreak and horror. Jesus saw suffering. He wept when he saw the dead Lazarus, even though he knew he could and would raise him from the dead. He weeps because there is something to weep about. Jesus doesn't skip over the lament. When he saw Jerusalem in Luke chapter 19 verse 41, he wept over it. And in his own life, he encountered and willingly endured suffering, of course, culminating in the horror of the cross. Characteristic number 5, Christ-like movies hate sin. Jesus hated sin. He hated destructive behavior that separated us from God. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and throw it away. It is better for you to have only one eye and live forever than to have two eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. So many movies don't show a destructive behavior in this way, but over-explain and over-humanize, or just let the audience judge for themselves. Christ-like movies depict sinful behavior in a mournful way. They don't make a spectacle out of it. Jordan Peele made a whole movie about how the human race can make a spectacle even out of the most horrifying things. The movie is, of course, Nope, which is about a man and his sister who discover UFO over their ranch, while the owner of a nearby theme park tries to profit off of the mysterious otherworldly phenomenon. The movie ultimately becomes an analogy of a fallen angel devouring human life, by exploiting their addiction to entertainment and spectacle. It's just a great movie that also directly quotes the Bible. Christ-like movies don't empower or downplay bad behavior. I'm also thinking of like the great gangster movie La Haine. After a youth is tortured by the police, a riot explodes on the streets of Paris, and it is there that three young men find a gun lost by the police in the riots and threaten to kill a cop if their friend dies. This movie is just about these young men who make so many bad decisions, like it's like a spiral of bad decisions, but still the movie stops them and gives them so many chances to make good decisions. And it finds like opportunities of grace, and it gives them opportunities to do good things in so many cinematic and creative ways. And the movie is always sorrowful when the young men again decide to make a decision that will destroy them and everything around them. Though it may reflect anger at sin and injustice, the Christ-like gaze doesn't laugh at the sinner or run away from the sinner in disgust. It moves toward the sinner with grace and compassion, not dismissing the gravity of the sin, but recognizing the need for relationship, not abandonment or cynical detachment if the situation is to be redeemed. Characteristic number 6, the question of faith. Scripture often describes Jesus as having compassion while looking at some individual group of people or even a whole city. A certain organic quality and looseness of form and interruptibility in which unforeseen beauty and holy moments are more important than hitting all the planned beats also characterizes the Christ-like gaze in film. When a movie deals with the question of fate, it's almost impossible not to acknowledge God, because nothing in a movie happens by coincidence, because there is always an author. And we as Christians believe that God is the author of all of reality. A movie like Castaway deals with a man who is the lone survivor of a plane crash on an island in the middle of nowhere. This film takes us right next to the protagonist. At the same time, it kind of has a God's point of view of the whole story. There's a certain balance of intimacy and distance in films that deal with the question of faith and are Christ-like. I'm also thinking of a movie like Citizen Kane. The life of the protagonist is told in retrospect from the point of view of an investigator, but still the film lets us share certain details and personal insights that only we have with the protagonist. These two movies are quite commercial in the way they are made, but also carry a clear art house sensibility. If you ever wonder why so many mainstream commercial films feel soulless, they don't allow breathing space for any atmosphere and moments to reveal themselves to us and show characters as being tools for the plot more than real humans. That's why Christ-like films are mostly art house or art house based movies. And I think that my video right here reflects that quite clearly. Characteristic number 7, the ending matters. Having loved, noticed and seen the suffering of its subjects, a Christ-like gaze ultimately longs to see them heal, change, recover, restore, resurrect. So many Christ-like films are truly defined by their final moments. There are a lot of well-made movies that end like in a really weird way with an open ending that feels lazy or unsatisfying. Imagine the life of Jesus without the resurrection. The ending does indeed define the story. You can detect a Christ-like movie by a certain grace it gives the characters in its ending. The resolution of the ending of A Sound of Metal shows the characters in such a graceful way when he finally lets go of whatever he chased and conforms with what God wants for him. And it's also in a movie like Whiplash, and the ending is quite the opposite of that, because in the movie, like, the character fights for whatever he wants and God just doesn't give it to him because it's not supposed to be for him. And in the end, like, the character suffers so much for that and wants it and God is like, okay, fine, have it. And it's a tragic ending that isn't told like a tragic ending, but still the ending has grace, has truth, and maybe it's the complete opposite of a happy ending, but still it's really God-centered. And I'm also thinking of a movie ending that's like really meaningful to me, that of Inception. The ending really shows that the things that appear like they're the most important really aren't the most important, like family, love, God and God's grace working through love and family. These are the most important things, and they're much bigger than science, logic and physics and the material world surrounding us. And this ending has been really meaningful to me all my life, even before coming to Christ. And now after coming to Christ, it's really gotten a deeper spiritual meaning. It's one of the greatest movie endings of all time and proved that even secular films can be Christ-like. Shout out to Brad McCracken, who wrote the article that inspired this video right here. If you made it so far into the video, thank you so much for your time and attention. I wish you all a blessed day and hope to have you back in the next one.